All right, now we're recording. Now we're recording, so stop. You got to start being funny now, guys. All right, so Kira, can you say the last part again? I started thinking about recording and I zoned out. Sorry.
Basically, he's just focusing more on providing evidence and laying out his like plan and his feelings more than he is talking about like what they need to like the goal. He's just saying like their progress so far.
Okay. All right. For the people looking on the recording, we're doing Booker T. Washington's Awakening of the Negro speech, and we're just talking about some initial thoughts on it first. Yash, what do you have to say about what Kira was saying? Is he talking about civil rights here?
He's not really talking about civil rights. He's kind of talking about how African Americans have to prove their worth through education and show that they have something of value that white people can depend on.
Right. I think you guys are, I think he is talking about civil rights, but he's not talking about it in the way that we're used to thinking about civil rights, right? We're used to thinking like march in the streets and gain your rights and, seize them from people. And he's definitely not talking about that. I think that's pretty clear. I want to direct you guys to, if you print it off, it's page 3, but it's the paragraph, let's see here, it's 1, 2, 3, the third paragraph in. It's the paragraph that starts, what is the object of all this outlay? You guys give me a thumbs up when you find it. Okay. Drew, Mike, Coop, you guys got it? Working on it? Okay. All right. Ilha, can you do me a favor and read that paragraph for us, for all of us to read?
What is the object of all this outlay? First, it must be borne in mind that we have in the South a peculiar and unprecedented state of things. It is of the utmost importance that our energy be given to meeting conditions that exist right about us, rather than conditions that existed centuries ago, or that exist in countries 1,000 miles away. What are the cardinal needs among the colored people in the South, most of whom are to be found on the plantations? Roughly, these needs may be stated as food, clothing, shelter, education, proper habits, and a settlement of race relations. The 7 millions of colored people of the South cannot be reached directly by any missionary agency, but they can be reached by sending out among them strong selected young men and women with the proper training of head, hand, and heart, who will live among these masses and show them how to lift themselves up.
Okay. That's good. I'm actually going to project the articles onto the screen here so that the recorded people can see what we're doing. All right. So thank you, Ilha. That was good. All right. So Michael, what does that paragraph mean that Ilha read? What do we think that means? Mike, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
So, I guess it's saying that their basic needs aren't being provided for, and we need people in the South to give them the proper training to lift themselves up and provide for their needs.
Okay. All right. Coop, what do you think?
I would say that he's kind of saying that they're not gonna get those needs unless they can prove that they deserve them. And yeah, so basically they need to prove themselves and like kind of show that they can elevate themselves up to the white level.
Okay. All right. I want to focus in. I think you guys are both right, but I want to try to tease out something else. You guys see my highlighting on your screen, right? Yeah. Okay. I want to focus on this sentence right here. It is of the utmost importance that our energy be given to meeting the conditions that exist right about us rather than the conditions that existed centuries ago or that exist in countries 1,000 miles away. Right? Victoria, what is he saying there?
So like
Not like after
Okay, someone else help her out. Yeah, Pooja.
I always I interpreted that as like they have to focus on meeting their present needs right now. Like they can't look at all the other countries that have had like no slavery for like the last 100 years, and they can't look at all the stuff that's been done wrong to slaves in the past. They just have to focus on living now and meeting those like standards of living that he's like listed out.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the Pooja, I think you're right. What we need to get to is what's the ramification of this philosophic idea, right? What does Washington view about the past versus the present and the future? Like, how is Washington conceiving past, present, and future? Because it's going to affect the plan he has. Anyone can chime in if it's not just Pooja. Anyone can chime in when we have to think of what the ramifications are. So let's narrow it down. What does Washington think about the past? He's recommending that we do something about the past. What should we do?
Change what people have in their minds about African Americans from the past, change it to what is the current truth so that the future will be better.
Okay. All right. And we have evidence of that down here, that's exactly what he's doing, right? So he's saying that we can change the future by adjusting we can change the future by education, right? What can we do about the past? Or what does he want us to do about the past specifically? Anybody chime in?
He's sort of telling them to just like move on and like live in the here and the now, because he thinks that being stuck on the past isn't going to help them. And yeah.
Absolutely correct, right? Washington does not want you to dwell on the fact that it's the past, right? And he's knowing what's his background. Did we talk about the biography of them last time? I think we did, right? What's his background as a child?
A slave.
He was a slave. Yeah, he was a slave in the plantations of Alabama, right? And he, a former slave, the lowest of the low in the country, right? The bottom of the country, he's saying, leave the past in the past. Ignore the past and move on. Right? So Raul tells us that Washington has an optimistic view of the future, right? I think I think we can agree that Washington has an optimistic view of the future. How do we get that future? Drew, how are we supposed to get that future?
He says we're going to get that future by proving ourselves.
Right. And we're going to prove ourselves by doing X and Y. What is X and Y?
He says we're going to prove ourselves by working for it, showing that we can get to the same position as whites.
Right. By working for it, but what else? Blacks have always worked. Specifically it's not just work, because blacks have always worked. What is it?
I think he wants to reach the point where white people end up actually depending on black people and not the other way around.
Okay. Is that different than before? Were white people depending on blacks in 1850? I think they absolutely were, right? The entire economy is based on cotton. So it's different. There's something else. What's the next
He
step?
wants them to educate themselves so that they're qualified to work and so that they can be successful.
Yeah. It's not. Yeah. Take the next step. You're correct. You're on the right track. Let's take the next step. Educate them to do what? Let's go to let's see here. It's the paragraph that starts a more detailed example. A more detailed example, right? Let's go into this paragraph here. Cooper, you want to read this for us, please?
All right. A more detailed example of our methods at Tuskegee may be of interest. For example, we cultivate by student labor 650 acres of land. The object is not only to cultivate the land in a way to make it pay our boarding department, but at the same time to teach the students, in addition to the practical work, something of the chemistry of the soil, the best methods of drainage, dairying, the cultivation of fruit, the care of livestock and tools, and scores of other lessons needed by people whose main dependence is on agriculture, notwithstanding that 85% of the colored people in the South live by agriculture in some form. Aside from what has been done by Hampton, Tuskegee, and one or two other institutions, practically nothing has been attempted in the direction of teaching them about the very industry from which the masses of our people must get their subsistence. Friends Friends have recently provided means for the erection of a large new chapel at Tuskegee. Our students have made the bricks for this chapel. A large part of the timber is sawed by students at our own sawmill. The plans are drawn by our teacher of architecture and mechanical drawing, and students do the brick masonry, plastering, painting, carpentry work, tinning, slatting, and make most of the furniture. Practically, the whole chapel will be built and furnished by student labor. In the end, the school will have the building for permanent use, and the students will have a knowledge of the trades employed in its construction. In this way, all but 3 of the 30 buildings on the grounds have been erected. While the young men do the kinds of work I have mentioned, the young women to a large extent make, mend, and launder the clothing of the young men, and thus are taught important industries.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. So this whole paragraph is kind of a thesis statement about what he wants to do, right? The way he's running his school. So what's the difference about the labor that Black people are doing here and the labor that Black people have been doing since the beginning of the country?
The Black people are actually benefiting themselves through the labor also, not just serving someone.
Right. Okay. Okay. So that's true. There's something else. What else? That's correct. We just need to add more correct to it.
But
They're
they
making themselves independent from the white people.
Right. Right. I mean, there's nothing more independent than being able to build your own buildings and build your own furniture and build your own everything, right? That's pretty darn independent. That's about as independent as it comes. Okay. That's very good. What else?
that they can actually understand it so that they can use it for themselves and like move on just from the work.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're getting, yes. So they're benefiting from themselves. They're working for the benefit of themselves. They're working in a way that is going to make them independent, but they're also working in a way that they understand the principles of the work itself. They're not just picking cotton. They're learning, dairying and drainage and cultivation and livestock and tools, right? They're learning all those. They're not just learning how to stack bricks. They're learning how to paint and plaster and masonry and tinning and slatting and how to make furniture, right? And they're not, the whole idea here is that they are supposed to be learning everything they need to learn in order to make a business, right? That business will give them money, that money will give them equality, right? What do we think about this argument? What do we think about Washington's argument as a whole? What do you think? Yash, what do you think, man?
I think it makes logical sense, and like all the evidence that he has throughout the article, like convinces me that what he's talking about will work.
Yeah. How many times have you guys had teachers in your life tell you that like education is the key to your success? Right? I'd be willing to bet that like basically every teacher you've ever met has told you that, right? Some version of that, right? And probably your parents drill it into your head every minute of your life, right? And every time you're missing one assignment and they jump on you because your education is the key to your life, right? I'm not far off, am I? I'd be willing to bet that just about every adult you've ever met has told you that education is the key, right? what else? What do we think about this as not advice in general for everyone, but advice for the Black population of America specifically? I want you to make a value judgment on his advice.
I think it kind of neglects the inherent disadvantage that they have, and it doesn't really acknowledge that even if they do work extremely hard, they're still going to have these huge disadvantages that keep them from being as successful as white people because of the systems in place that are keeping them from doing so.
Okay. All right.
I kind of agree with Kira. As, like, in terms of what he wants, like Black people do, and like get an education, like he starts saying at the end about like how the South is like really like idle and like all the things that they do, and like even like the poor people like don't work because they're unwilling to. Well, like not no one can work, and that was like a huge problem too for why the South was so disadvantaged in the Civil War, is that they were so focused on like agriculture that they forgot like industry. He's like, we need to learn those industrial skills, which isn't wrong, but I think he sort of like almost views the white population naively. Like he says, like, you know, a Black man to be able to foreclose on a white man's house, yeah, sure, but it's not like the white man is going to react well to that. I mean, you're in a period like following after Reconstruction. There's no way they're going to be like, oh, okay, I guess it's okay that he did that. It's going to come out with violence and not kindness.
Yeah, I think that's good. Ilha, what do you think? What can you add? I think that's smart. That was smart, Pooja.
Yeah, I agree with Pooja. Like the white people are gonna react kind of harshly to this, like the Black people suddenly becoming successful. But compared to like the alternative where it's just like radical change, like we talked about last time, this would be more accepted and like slowly like gradually actually work in getting the Black people to succeed.
Right. If okay, so what's the vocabulary concept here? So Kira, I think Kira accurately identified a problem right in her first answer there. But what's the vocabulary concept? If you have to present that answer in an essay, what's the term or concept I'm looking for? What is going to be holding people back in Washington's solution? It's a concept we've had from the first couple of days of class.
Systemic racism?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Right. So when you're describing this, you need to, I need to see the term systemic racism, right? As that systemic racism is when, well, one of you define it for me. Victoria, can you define systemic racism for me?
Is it just like racism in like a system, like a specific system? Like I don't know how to like explain it like detailed, but like kind of in that type of form, I guess. Like it's not like one group, but it's like the like
All
kind
right.
of.
Drew, why don't you help her out?
So systemic racism is essentially a form of racism, which is like embedded as a normal practice within a society or a nation or an organization, and it ends up leading to certain issues like discrimination and all sorts of things like healthcare, housing,
Right.
office, etc.
And the fundamental key here when we're talking about systemic race, Drew, that was correct. That was good. I'm just wanting to expand a little bit, but you're absolutely correct. The fundamental thing that we want to recognize is that systemic racism is divorced from the individual. Okay, I want you to abandon the concept in your mind that racism is an individual trait. Okay, it is not an individual trait. Okay, you can't really just say Bob is a racist, right? That's not an actual correct statement, right? Even though Bob says, I hate Black people and blah, blah, he's talking about all this kind of stuff. You can't just say Bob is a racist. The most correct way to say that is Bob is an expression of the system of racism he lives in, right? You have to understand that your individual identity is not as important as your identity as part of the network of people, right? You all are part of this system where all those identities you have are like linked together in like a chain of different things, right? And they all have all sorts of different interactions. The reason you chose to be online is because of these outside forces. And the reason you chose to dress the way you do is because of these outside forces. And the reason you choose this person to be your mate, and the reason you choose this career, and the reason you choose this school, and the reason you choose this, you know, all these things that you're choosing, they feel like they're an independent choice. They feel like you as an individual are making them, but you're not, right? You're not divorced from the world. You aren't just you in a vacuum. It's you interacting with all these other people around you and all these other institutions and all these other organizations, all the way from like the United States, all the way down to Hillcrest High School, all the way down to Mr. Vinci's class, down to the relationship with your mom, you know, like all of these things have these influences on you, right? At different degrees of severity, different degrees, you know, what they're making, but they're all contributing to your action. So when Bob stands on his front lawn and he yells at the black guy across the street, right? Or when Karen calls on the black guys the black people having a barbecue and Karen calls the cops on them, right? We want to say Karen's a racist, right? But the most accurate way to understand that is Karen's actions are an expression of the racism of the system that she's in. That's the fundamental truth of systemic racism. And that's it's the primary criticism against Washington, right? Is that Washington is ignoring systems and forces. He's ignoring those systems and forces, or at least it appears that he has an incomplete understanding of them, right? Washington has a very individualistic understanding of things, right? Where the individual black person, I can't solve the fact that I was a slave. I can't solve the fact that my ancestors were slaves. I can't solve the fact that Alabama sucks. I can't solve the fact that, you know, the schools are terrible. I can't solve those things. So what do? I solve the thing I can. I read a book. I get to the Tuskegee Institute. I learn how to make bricks. I learn how to make a building. I learn how to run a business, right? And like I learn how to do those things. That way me as an individual can rise up. Right? Washington is a very individual-centric idea. Cool? Do any of you guys have questions or problems or comments on that? Michael, do you feel like an individual? Oh, Ro, go. Yeah, Ro.
I was just gonna say, in response to what you were saying about with the whole Karen situation, I feel like it makes sense in my head what you said, how it's not how you said the more correct way to say it, right?
Mhm.
But then just like in my brain, hearing it said that way, like that is a result of the system that she is in, makes it seem like the way it sounds in my head is like it's not necessarily her fault.
Yeah, that's the very smart follow-up question, right? Because if we're all just actions within a system, then is it your fault when you are racist, right? When Karen calls the cops on a barbecue, is she responsible, right? That's a tricky question, and I don't have a solid answer for you, right? It's a question that people have to wrestle with all the time, right? People wrestle with this all the time. If we have like a Black Lives Matter protest, let's say, a Black Lives Matter protest, and one dude comes up and he takes a rock and he throws it through the window, right? And then three guys next to him go, "All right, awesome, we're breaking windows now," and they pick up rocks and they start throwing it too, right? Are they all guilty of throwing the rock? Or are they all a manifestation of the group actions?
Both.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is both, right? I mean, you still arrest them, right? You still arrest them. You still face charges, and Karen is still acting racist, right? This is why we say Karen's a racist in that case, in that example, right? We say she's a racist because she's doing racist things, right? So there's two ways to understand this. On one level, we're like the police officer that has to deal with the immediate problem in front of us, right? The immediate problem in front of us is Karen's being a racist person, right? So you take her, you isolate her, you try to address that situation. The other way to think about this is if we are lawmakers or administrators of a country or, deans of a university, right? Or like philosophers trying to fix society, right? We have to think about this in these really broad ways. Locking Karen up is not going to solve the problem. What you have to do is fix the school system that made her do those actions, and fix the media that made her do those actions, and fix the neighborhood that made her do those actions. You know what I mean? Like, you have to fix all of those systems so you stop producing Karens.
But
That's a lot better.
I fully agree that, but they didn't make her.
Right. Which is why you still put the person in jail, right? Which is why you still stop them. You still have to do that. We just have this acknowledgement that at a certain point, if you want to solve the problem, I can't solve the problem by just calling out individuals and saying, you're a bad person, you're a bad person. That doesn't solve the problem, right? That's just going to perpetuate the problem because the system is still there. The system will still produce racist results, right? So you do have to stop someone like the Karen, right? You stop her, but then you have to re-educate her. You have to retrain her on how to interact and how to think and how to act, right? And that's the only real solution. If it's a violent person, obviously you got to throw him in jail, right? We can't let the violent person go out just because we're like, oh, well, his buddies were violent, so he's okay. That doesn't work.
So then where do you see like this situation and like the system in like 20 or 30 years from now?
Well, that's up to you guys. That's up to you guys, right? You're the generation that's going to fix it. You're the generation that I'm doing my best, man. I got like 12 of you guys here I'm trying to convince. I'm doing my best to fix the system as much as I can, but what am I? I'm just some dude who talks to kids all day. Yeah. I don't have an answer for that, Ro. Really, it's up to whether you guys can fix this. But the concept of it being a systemic problem is now widespread enough that it's being taught in schools and that people are understanding it and that, you know what I mean? So I'm hopeful that it'll fix, right? In the meantime, Washington would say, go to school, right? He's like, the system may change. And Washington probably, I'll bet you if we bring Booker T. Washington in on our Zoom call and I explain all this to him, he'd probably be like, yeah, that sounds right, but still go to school because the system may not be fixed by the time you are 30 or 40 or 50, right? By the time you're producing your own children, by the time you're getting your job, by the time, he's like, the system won't be fixed. Go to school. Yeah. Let's move to DuBois. Let's move to DuBois. DuBois. Raul, I'm sorry I don't have a solid answer for you, man. Those are very smart questions that don't really have answers yet, not fully. Okay, so Cooper, why don't you start us off? What's your overall impression of the DuBois reading?
So a lot of what I got for it is like he's talking about the identity crisis that he's having. He's the identity term. I'm trying to remember what it was. What was it called? The identity term that you used. The one like struggling to balance multiple identities.
Intersectionality.
Yeah, I got a lot of that from it because he has to separate being a person from being a black man because being a black man doesn't classify as being a person.
Yeah.
And so he gets that crisis from the question of how does it feel to be the problem. He goes back to that a lot, and he doesn't really know what to do about it.
Right. Okay. That's astute. I like that. That's astute. Yash, what do you got? What do you think? What are your thoughts on Du Bois?
I feel like this article was kind of confusing, like you said, because of just the way he wrote it. But overall, it kind of looks like he's talking about how throughout history, changes have been made, but nothing's really led to a solid result. And yeah, especially he talks about voting and how it was great and all that, but then it went away, and the ballots were stuffed and stuff like that. He talks about how it didn't end up working in the long run.
Uh-huh. Yeah, Victoria?
I agree with both of what they're saying. Like, I actually had a really hard time trying to understand what he was trying to say.
So I'd be willing to bet that probably all of you had a harder time understanding Du Bois than Washington. Is that a true statement? Right? Du Bois writes in almost poetry, right? Like it's very stylistic. It's a lot of really high-minded kind of ideas. I don't want you to feel dumb because every single group in class when we were reading it, they were all having a hard time understanding it too. So I don't want you to feel dumb. Du Bois is like expert level English writing, right? There's a reason why he's oftentimes at the top of lists of like greatest speakers in American history, right? He's oftentimes in like top 5, right? And he's like a level 10 English speaker, right? Level 10 English speaker. At best, I'm like a 7, and he's like a 10, right? So, it's tough. I agree with you, Victoria. I'd like to direct our attention here to the paragraph where it starts after the Egyptian. You guys see that one? This paragraph really stood out to me as a pretty interesting paragraph. Who didn't read? I forget who read. All right, somebody volunteer. Let's go. Go, Drew.
After the Egyptian and Indian, the Greek and Roman, the Tetuan and the Mongolian, the Negro is a sort of seventh son, born with a veil and gifted with second sight in this American world, a world which yields no self-consciousness but only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, 2 souls, 2 thoughts, 2 reconciled strivings, 2 warring ideals in one dark body, whose dog strength keeps it from being torn asunder. The history of the American Negro in the history of this strife, this longing to attain self-conscious manhood, to merge his double self into a better and truer self. In this merging, he wishes neither of the older selves to be lost. He does not want to Africanize America, for America has too much to teach the world in Africa. He does not wish to bleach his Negro blood in the flood of white Americanism, for he believes, foolishly, perhaps but fervently, that Negro blood has yet a message for the world. He simply believes to make it possible for a man to both be a Negro and an American without being cursed and spit upon by his fellows, without losing the opportunity of self-development.
Ooh, fire. Yeah, Du Bois is on fire, right? That he can spit some bars. Yeah, that is a beautiful, beautiful paragraph. If that's not poetry, I don't know what is, right? I particularly am moved by the part where he says he does not wish to bleach his Negro blood in a flood of white Americanism, for he believes foolishly perhaps, but fervently, that Negro blood has yet a message for the world. Ooh, that's good. That's good. All right. So, Raul, what do you think about this paragraph, man?
I believe that he is kind of I'm still trying to fully piece it together in my brain. But I feel like here he's kind of in the first half. He's exploring what Cooper was talking about, the I forgot the term, the multiple identities thing going on. One feels his two-ness, an American, and right. But he is very poetic, and it's a bit abstract. And that's probably, I don't know if he's just like, that's just the way he wrote, or like maybe he had like a purpose for that.
So we have this theme of two-ness that he's talking about, that Cooper alluded to and Raul identified as well, right? That this two-ness, what are the two identities? Anyone? Yeah, what are the two identities? Come on now.
Would it be like being an American, but then also being an African American? So like
Negro, right? And his word is Negro, right? But being American and being Black, right? What is the difference between these two identities? There's a fundamental kind of philosophic difference between these two identities that he's leaning upon.
Can you repeat that?
Which I couldn't hear you.
Oh, can you repeat that, what you just said? I didn't catch all of it.
Yeah. So there's a difference between these two identities, right? So like I have the identity of a white person and the identity of a man, right? These are my two identities, and functionally those two identities are the same for me, right? They function, they have the same functionality in my brain. He's making an argument that his identity as Black and his identity as a man, or identity as an American, he uses both, right, is different. What makes it different about that?
Well, his identity as a Black man makes people view him as less than. So, but his identity as just like an American and a person, like, is sort of how he sees himself, is what I'm getting. So he has this conflicting idea of how other people see him and how he sees himself, and he doesn't know if he should express himself and be proud of his culture, even though that's going to like keep him suppressed and keep people thinking that he's less than, or if he should like assimilate and just try to be like everyone else around him.
Okay, this is good. We touched on it very briefly in the beginning of the year, like on the first day, right? But I don't expect you to remember this, right? When I used my Rosa Parks story, right? Rosa Parks, the reason why it's bad for Rosa Parks to move to the back of the bus is because she doesn't have a choice. She's being forced into the back, right? And she has that identity imposed upon her, right? That the identity is second-class citizen, right? That's her identity that forces her into the back, okay? He is recognizing that as well. His Black identity is an imposed identity upon him, right? Where that Black identity contains with it prejudice, racism, can't get a job, can't get treated well, can't get a date, right? Like all those things are imposed upon him, where his identity as a man or as an American is an expressed identity. The key here is that he's recognizing that Black is not the default human, right? If I ask you to draw a human, right, you will probably draw me a white man, right? Almost everyone on the planet would, because that's the way we conceive it. We conceive the default human to be male and white, right? And he's saying that that's not right, that the default human should include all the races, right? He will in other speeches also include women. It's not intended to be gendered, right? His language is not supposed to be, you're supposed to understand whenever he's using he that it's a non-gendered term, right? But that's that dual identity, right? That's the key we have to recognize, is that we have it's the difference between an expressed identity of your own and an imposed identity from outsiders. And that's where he's seeing this, right? He is one of the very first writers to talk about this as like a social force upon him as an individual, right? He's one of the very first writers to do this. But after he does this, Black writers like in the Harlem Renaissance and stuff are going to be writing about this over and over and over again. This is going to come back as a repeated theme, right? And then actually feminist writers in the 1960s in second wave feminism are also going to bring this up. Betty Friedan brings this up in The Feminine Mystique, where she says woman isn't the default, right? Woman is considered a subcategory of human, right? This is why everything in the world is made for men, right? This is why if you go to the locker, the top shelf is too high for most women, right? Not too high for Pooja, because you know you're like a tower, right? But too tall for most women. Most women strain to use the top shelf of a locker room, and that's because the default is man. And so the locker is built for men, and they just assume that all people will use it. Right? This is the origin of privilege. When we talk about white privilege, we talk about white privilege or male privilege or straight privilege, right? This is the origin of privilege. White privilege is a privilege because the world views you as the default. You're never subcategory of human. You're never like human dash something, right? Right? Toni Morrison says, I wish I could live my life without the dash. That she says that she's condemned to do, no matter what she does, she's always a dashed American, right? An African American, a woman American, or something like that, right? She's always a dash. And she wishes that she could live her life without the dash. White men live their life without the dash. And this is what W.B. Du Bois is getting at, right? Okay. One last thing really, really quick, because we got to go. If you guys can still see my screen, right? Okay, so here on the front page of my homepage, you should have noticed this really, really subtle link that I put here, right? These are the test questions for the test coming up, okay? These 5 questions here, on the day of the test, I will give you 3, and you will choose to answer 2 of those, okay? What I want you to do, excuse me, what I want you to do for the next class period is I want you to sit down and write a thesis statement and an outline for a 5-paragraph essay for all 5 of these questions, okay? The people in class are going to be working as a group to make their outlines together, right? And I can't do that with you guys. So I need you to do it on your own, and then the next Zoom meeting, we'll have a discussion and we'll fix all of your guys' outlines and stuff. On the day of the test, you are not allowed to use your outline. You have to just use your mind, just your brain, and you're gonna write the essay yourself, okay? Cool, do we have any questions about that?
So next class period, so next week will be just in class, like going through each question and then outlining.
Correct. Yeah, so the next time I see like 7th period, so I have 7th and 8th, you guys are 7th and 8th, right? So 7th period, well, next class, 7th today just did the Washington and DuBois, right? And so next time I see 7th period, they will do the outlining. First period tomorrow is doing Washington and DuBois. That's what first period's doing tomorrow. And so first period next week, right? So on Monday and Tuesday, we're outlining. Wednesday, Thursday, we're taking the test. Is that more clear? Are we good? Cool. All right, so for Monday, Tuesday, bring your outlines. Cool? All right, and on that note, I'm done.